Fellow St. Lucians, this is Openmike, and we are now back to the third segment of our program, and we have had a slight switch in individuals. Mr. Parker Ragnanan, Senior Environmental Health Officer, Port Health Manager, and Surveillance Manager for the port. Mr. Ragnanan has 26 years experience with the Ministry of Health and Environment. So undoubtedly, this gentleman provides a wealth of experience, and what better person can we have in that position today when St. Lucia is confronted with a major virus like the Ebola virus. On that score, I shall waste little time in requesting, or asking, should I say, Mr. Ragnanan, to highlight to the St. Lucian public what is being done at the various ports of entry, because this is the area that is most vulnerable. A, for detection, and B, for carriers of the Ebola virus, if that is the case. Mr. Ragnanan, could you please give us an idea of...
Thank you very much, Mr. Shasney. I just want to go back a little bit and to tell you that in 2005, St. Lucia, as a member of the World Health Assembly, signed on to an important piece of regulations, which is known as the International Health Regulations. And as part of these regulations, and I must say that it is a legally binding piece of legislation, where countries must have core capacities in place at the ports of entry, along with surveillance in dealing with international threats to public health. Importantly, WIN St. Lucia was able also to work with a number of countries in the region, and I had the privilege of going out into several English-speaking Caribbean countries to looking at the best approach in terms of management of the ports for port health purposes. And what came out of that was a document was prepared, and in 2006 there is a document that is ratified by Cabinet to speak to the systems that must be instituted and be put in place at the points of entry to manage these eventualities. Subsequently, we've had to implement a port health surveillance program for St. Lucia. And as part of this program is disease surveillance. Disease surveillance is just one component of port health, because there are many other activities. Like, for example, we need to look at the whole question of management of waste from international sources. We have to look at the whole question of food safety and foods coming into St. Lucia.
Correct.
We have to look at disease and infectious diseases. We have to look at the issue of the transportation of human remains. So a St. Lucian dies overseas and must come back here.
Yeah, that's right.
And therefore there must be systems in place for examining the cadaver, the body, and for releasing it. There is also the system in place for cadavers that are coming into St. Lucia for
the medical schools.
For research and purposes. And all of these are to be dealt with at the ports. Further, we have to look at the whole question of water quality, vector management at the ports. I must tell you that we had an incident a few months ago where there was a 40-foot container that came into the country, and there was a live raccoon in that container. And therefore systems had to be put in place to manage that situation. What we had to do was to ensure that the raccoon was killed on that container, and also we saw that there was a high level of contamination of the products that was there. So we had to go out and to condemn the entire consignment as a result. So vector management, and it is important because when you introduce new vectors into your country, you may very well be introducing new means of diseases.
Right. Correct.
That is why it's important for you to have controls at your point of entry. So the port health surveillance program would entail this and more. Now, speaking directly to infectious diseases, what we have is a first line of call. Our ports are not just airports, but they are seaports as well. I will speak of the airports first and what is happening at the airports.
Correct.
In terms of the airports, we have nurses who are public health trained nurses.
Okay.
And they are stationed at the airports at this present time. And their role is, one, to conduct surveillance of incoming passengers. So they would be monitoring people as they come in to see whether they pick up any signs of illness. And these persons would be called offline. And we have a room where we can interview these persons that are suspect. And there is also a room at each of the airport where you can actually quarantine somebody and keep them there quarantined, and they have enough facilities to keep them going at the airports. What we are doing now with the advent of Ebola is we've met with some of the airline agencies, and we are going to institute a questionnaire, just like you have the immigration ED cards. We are going to have a questionnaire, and passengers coming into St. Lucia would receive this questionnaire and fill out these forms. Again, we are hoping that people will be honest in the way that they answer the questions. So the nurse will be the one receiving the questionnaire on the arrival of an aircraft to St. Lucia. Further, every airline that comes here must present what is called a declaration of health. The pilot, by international law, has to submit that document to the Ministry of Health. And so we're going to have port health officers who would go at the door of the aircraft before anybody comes off to receive that document, to vet it, and to find out if there is any case of infectious disease. If there is, then the entire passenger and crew of this aircraft would be put on hold.
For what period?
It depends as to what the nature of the illness is, what is manifest. If there is a suspect case of Ebola on an aircraft, I can tell you that there are international protocols as to how you manage that case. First, the airline is charged to removing that person and put them in a seat to the rear of the aircraft. So there'll be less contact with people. They are to be assigned a separate toilet facility. But you have to know all the persons who are sitting next to that individual, the front row and the row immediately behind. And all of these persons would have to be questioned and would have to become persons of interest. And therefore, we would have to get the addresses, the contact numbers, where these people will be staying, so that we can do daily monitoring of these individuals. That is why it's important, because we are also filling out a form daily. So now we know that we have Nigerians coming into St. Lucia, as we've said. Now, it would amaze you that people travel history and patterns have changed. People generally look to see where it is more cost effective and what routes to take. And so we have had a number of Nigerians coming into St. Lucia through the George Charles Airport, not just through Ionora Airport. So that means they go probably through Brazil, Panama, Trinidad, or through Barbados, and they come through Liat or Caribbean Airlines into St. Lucia. So both airports are open because you get persons from international sources coming in. Those persons who are coming out of an area where you have Ebola active today, we would take the information down, and that information is submitted to the epidemiology unit of the Ministry of Health, who would be doing the surveillance, because we have systems in place at our medical schools, at our hotels, where they are to submit daily, a daily monitoring form and assessment of the persons who have come into St. Lucia to say whether they have any signs and symptoms of a disease, because you want to pick it up very early. So that is why it is instituted daily. So the moment there is a situation, we would be on top of it. As part of that, the Ministry of Health has 2 on-call Ebola teams in place already. They are made up of a doctor, a nurse, an environmental health officer, a surveillance officer, and the fire officers, the EMTs. And they have received training, and they have understood the protocol of dealing with an illness. We have gotten commitment from the fire service that there are 2 ambulances that would be set aside specifically for Ebola.
How many?
2. One for the north, one for the south. And so once there is a suspect,
that is the ambulance that will be used.
Yes. The chief medical officer would be informed and would be the one to make that call. And that team would be activated immediately, who would go on scene, on site, having all the prerequisite personal protective clothing and equipment, and be able to manage with that case, and the transportation will be done to a quarantine area. As we have told you, there are 3 hospitals with quarantine rooms, isolation rooms that is, and so these rooms are going to be activated, and that is how we intend to manage.
Okay.
At the airports also, we are going to be distributing a card with information, basic information, whether you feel ill and that kind of thing. Basic health tips, and along with that there would be contact numbers that persons can call.
Of all people?
No, just
suspected.
Everybody will be receiving that information. When you come in, that would be handed
so
to you.
You have that on file?
Yes, information like a pocket, a card that would fit into your wallet with basic health tips and the information about contacting if you feel ill and so forth. This is a number to contact. And so that is part of what has been instituted at this point in time.
How long have you been doing that?
We did it very well during the H1N1 outbreak.
I know that, yes.
And we had nurses at both our airports. But sad to say, after the episode of H1N1, we lost a number of our key resources at the ports. And therefore we were not...
Resources, what type of resources?
Human resources.
Oh, human resources.
Human resources. And we were not able to follow through with some of the programs and systems that we had instituted. So it created some challenge for us. Now with Ebola, we've just started back now. We just received, for the last month, have been able to employ nurses back again at our airports.
Now,
and
is it, you brought in new nurses for that? When I say new nurses, is it nurses that have been at the hospitals or nurses have been brought in from other areas?
Yeah. The nurses we were able to get on very short term are retared nurses.
Good, okay.
But they have a wealth of experience.
Oh, definitely, no question.
And they are public health trained nurses.
Okay.
Further,
how many nurses in total so far?
We have 7 nurses.
7, okay.
But they do not all work at the same time.
No,
they work on a shift basis. There are 7 nurses, and we are looking at increasing that pool of nurses. So in case a nurse is not well, you can get another nurse to replace. So we're looking at increasing that pool of nurses. And we are in the process of conducting specific training. They have received training, for example, in infection control management. So they would know how to deal with a situation where it arises at the airport. Because if somebody comes, it doesn't matter where you come from, and you start throwing up in the arrival terminal, the nurse will have to take charge.
Got you.
And importantly, the law makes provision for the police to lend assistance, because we've been saying already that dealing with health security, it's not a Ministry of Health issue, it is a national issue.
That's right.
And therefore, the Quarantine Act of St. Lucia makes special provision for and gives powers to the police, powers of arrest.
Okay.
So if somebody doesn't want to cooperate,
yes.
powers to deal with crowd management, so that you can detain persons and you can cordon off an area. And not just the police officers, but my understanding is that the ports police also have same powers. And therefore, if there is a situation that arrives at the port, it would be the nurse to take charge of that situation, being ably assisted by security personnel at the airport to be able to cordon off an area, to be able to quarantine somebody who comes in, and further, we would make that judgment whether you would need an on-call team, the Ebola on-call team, to come in and to lend further assistance.
St. Lucia, this is Openmike. We've just come to the end of the 3rd segment of our program, and we'll be right back.